Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the grand cosmic courtroom of Isaiah 41 to witness God's absolute sovereignty over the rise and fall of ancient empires. And we really need to dig into this because what we're looking at here isn't just some dusty ancient text. Not at all. It's a stunning historical and theological document that perfectly predicts the geopolitical upheavals of the ancient Near East. Specifically, we're going to focus on the great Persian conqueror, Cyrus, and his massive role in liberating Israel.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, the cosmic courtroom. Second, Cyrus, the righteous conqueror. Third, the panic of idol makers. Fourth, comfort for chosen Israel. And finally, historical proof and fulfillment.
Section 1. The Cosmic Courtroom.
In Isaiah chapter 41, verse 1, we read this: "Keep silence before me, O islands, and let the people renew their strength. Let them come near, then let them speak. Let us come near together to judgment." The imagery here is just incredibly powerful. The Lord is essentially acting as a judge, calling the entire world to order. He's presenting his arguments and challenging the nations to step forward, renew their strength, and present their absolute best case. It's a direct invitation to judge between the living God and their man-made idols.
Now, to truly get what this summons means, we need to understand that word islands. In Hebrew, the word is which translates to a coast, shore, or island. But in the context of the prophet Isaiah, it specifically refers to the countries far away from Judea, those remote regions inhabited by idolatrous Gentile nations. So God isn't just talking to his immediate neighbors here. He is literally projecting his voice across the seas to the farthest edges of the known world, completely demanding their attention.
Section 2. Cyrus, the righteous conqueror.
Okay, verse 2 asks a critical question. Who raised up the righteous man from the east, called him to his foot, gave the nations before him, and made him rule over kings? The prophet is revealing that this conqueror, who, by the way, scatters enemies like dust to his sword and driven stubble to his bow, is none other than Cyrus, king of Persia. And the thing is, he isn't just randomly out there conquering, he's actively doing God's work. The sheer, rapid nature of his conquests, where literally no one could resist him, is presented as undeniable proof that the Lord is the one directing his path.
And this gets even more specific in verse 25, which says, "I have raised up one from the north, and he shall come. From the rising of the sun shall he call upon my name." This maps brilliantly to the historical geography of Cyrus's rise. Think about it. He comes from Media in the north, and from Persia in the east, literally the rising of the sun. The prophecy states he's going to step upon the mighty princes of Babylon as if they were just mere mortar, crushing them exactly like a potter treading and molding clay to his will.
Section 3. The Panic of Idol Makers.
Verse 5 captures the world's reaction perfectly. The isles saw it and feared, the ends of the earth were afraid, drew near, and came. Historically, a massive general terror seized the nations when they saw the conquests of Cyrus. Rulers like Croesus of Lydia, Nabonidus of Babylon, and Amasis of Egypt frantically banded together. They were forming these desperate offensive and defensive alliances against the Persian threat. They drew near to each other out of absolute sheer panic.
Which brings us to verses 6 and 7, and honestly, this highlights the absolute absurdity of their solution. Because instead of turning to the true God, what do? They double down on their idols. They hire a carpenter and a goldsmith, they take a metal image, cover it with gold plates, smooth it on an anvil, and check the soldering. And then comes the supreme touch of irony. They fasten the idol down with nails so it won't totter and fall over. It's almost comical. It's like wearing a lucky hat to make sure your football team wins, and if they happen to lose, well, you just go buy a new lucky hat. They genuinely suppose that by nailing a fake god to the floor of their temples, their kingdoms would somehow magically be safe from the entire Persian army.
This whole situation leads to God's ultimate challenge in verses 22 and 23. God essentially asks, "Can your idols predict the future?" He challenges these nations to bring forth their strong reasons. Can these worthless nailed-down statues declare what is going to happen hereafter? Can they show the former things or predict the latter end? The answer, of course, is a resounding no. God totally exposes that these idols are nothing. They're an abomination, completely incapable of directing or even predicting the rise and fall of empires.
Section 4. Comfort for chosen Israel.
This contrast brilliantly illustrates the vast difference between the idolatrous world and God's people. Just look at the juxtaposition here. On one side, you have the nations. They panic. They forge these desperate political alliances and they build nailed-down idols hoping for some sort of magical protection. But on the other side, you have Israel. And they are commanded to simply fear not, to trust the Lord, and to act as his servant.
We see this beautiful affirmation right in verses 8 and 9. But thou, Israel, art my servant, Jacob whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham my friend. The text explains that God took them from the ends of the earth, calling Abraham from Ur of the Chaldees, and specifically chose them. Unlike the pagan nations who quite literally have to build their own gods from scratch, Israel is chosen by the living God, with the firm, unshakable promise that they will not be cast away.
Then comes what is arguably one of the most comforting verses in the text, verse 10. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. While the rest of the nations are absolutely terrified of Cyrus, God explicitly tells Israel not to be afraid of the Persians. Why? Because the Lord himself will uphold Judah with the right hand of his righteousness. He will aid them and protect them as they eventually return from Babylon to rebuild Jerusalem.
Furthermore, in verse 15, God says, Behold, I will make thee a new, sharp threshing instrument, having teeth. Thou shalt thresh the mountains and beat them small. Now, a threshing instrument is used to separate the grain from the chaff. So here, God is using this really powerful agricultural metaphor to illustrate exactly how he's going to empower this weak, seemingly insignificant remnant to completely scatter their mighty oppressors, basically turning their massive armies into chaff blown away by the wind.
And then, in verses 18 and 19, he promises, I will open rivers in high places, and fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water. When Judah finds itself poor, needy, and thirsty, God is going to hear them. He paints this vivid picture of a healed land, a virtual paradise, even planting 7 symbolic trees, like the cedar, the myrtle, and the oil tree, right smack in the middle of the desert.
Section 5. Historical Proof and Fulfillment. Now, according to the ancient historian Josephus, there is this utterly fascinating account regarding Cyrus. Josephus records that Cyrus the Great actually read the book of Isaiah's prophecies. I mean, imagine this for a second. A Persian king is reading a Jewish scroll written 140 years before he even conquered Babylon. And right there in the text, he finds his own name and his exact military conquests described. Josephus notes that when Cyrus read this, he deeply admired the divine power, and an earnest desire and ambition actually seized him to fulfill what was written. And that is what prompted him to send the Jewish people back to their land to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is that God's hand didn't just stop with Cyrus. When we look at the timeline, we see how the Lord repeatedly worked through various pagan empire leaders. First, Cyrus decrees the temple rebuilding. Later on, King Darius is swayed by the profound wisdom of his friend Zerubbabel, who made the argument that truth is the strongest force on earth, and Darius grants him permission to continue the work without any interference. Then, King Xerxes, after hearing about the ruined walls of Jerusalem from his cupbearer Nehemiah, gives him letters of protection to rebuild the city fortifications. Even Alexander the Great, when approaching Jerusalem, surprisingly bowed to the Jewish high priest. Why? Because he had previously seen that exact priest in a dream assuring him of victory over the Persians. Time and time again, God directed the rulers of the world to protect his people.
And this all perfectly culminates in verse 27. The first shall say to Zion, Behold, behold them, and I will give to Jerusalem one that bringeth good tidings. While the idols could say absolutely nothing, God is the first to bring the ultimate good news, that Cyrus would deliver his people, and the exiles would finally be returning home to Jerusalem.
Isaiah concludes this entire sweeping argument in verse 29 with a definitive verdict on the idols. Behold, they are all vanity. Their works are nothing. Their molten images are wind and confusion. And really, that's the core takeaway from our explainer today. The idols of the nations, no matter how much shiny gold covers them, or how firmly you nail them to the floor, are utterly empty. They are just wind and confusion. It is the Lord alone who dictates the grand sweep of human history, raising up kings from the east and the north to accomplish his purposes.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound final thought. God perfectly orchestrated the movements of Cyrus, Darius, and Alexander to fulfill his promises to a small, captive nation. So I'll leave you with this question. If the Lord meticulously directs the rise and fall of ancient empires, who truly controls the nations today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring these fascinating historical realities.